If you have a Bible, turn for a moment to Proverbs 3. Proverbs 3:6 reads, "In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil." So what happens if you don't acknowledge him and you don't depart from evil? We're studying the book of Revelation, and it gives an idea of what's eventually going to befall the earth to those people who have no acknowledgement of God or no dependence upon him. But even if you do acknowledge him, sometimes it's very difficult to understand how he's directing your path. And sometimes it's very difficult to understand where you stand in his eyes. Look at Job. Job was a man who loved God. It was very difficult for him to understand how God was directing his path when he was allowing Satan to test him so severely. He really couldn't understand or accept the fact that God was in control. And yet, in the end, Job received everything he had lost and much more. Look at Joseph. Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers. Hard to see how God was directing his path then. But it all turned out in the way that Joseph became one of the highest ranking officials in Egypt. And as a result, when famine struck Canaan, he was allowed to bring his family and others into Goshen and save them from starvation. God did direct his path, although it was hard to see at the time. And look at Moses. It's hard to see how someone can be directing your path when your parents put you in a homemade raft and send you out in the Nile, floating down the Nile. I can't picture the parents how they felt doing this. But God did direct his path into the hands of Pharaoh's daughter. He was raised in the palace in Cairo and was treated and educated in the best education and knowledge that the world at that time had to offer. Maybe it was God's idea that he would just become Pharaoh and then free the Hebrew slaves. However, Moses killed an Egyptian overseer and was banished from the kingdom. Was God directing his path then? When he had to go to Midian and spend 40 years as a sheep herder, a long way from the palaces in Egypt. Was God directing his path when he called him to go back to Egypt, a reluctant Moses, to go back and free the slaves after being away from that area for 40 years? The trip from Midian to Cairo was about 3 weeks' journey. Moses undertook that journey at least twice. Yet when he had the Hebrews with him, it took him 40 years to make that 3-week journey. Was God directing his path all that time? It was hard to see how he could be. But yet, it was the only way that God could understand and undertake the people of the Hebrew people to become totally dependent upon God. It says, in all your ways, acknowledge him. Moses did that in most ways. He served God faithfully for many, many years. He led the Hebrews for 40 years through the desert, put up with all their bickering and their stiff-neckedness and all the rest of the things that they complained about. He served God in the fact that he compiled and wrote down the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Genesis, the book of beginnings, and the book of the patriarchs. Exodus, the story of the escape from Egypt. Numbers, the story of the escape through the Sinai Peninsula and through the desert. Leviticus, the book also of history and also of the law. And of course, Deuteronomy, Moses' admonition, God's admonition to Hebrews through Moses about all the things they should do and should not do. The laws that no one can follow precisely. Was God directing Moses' steps when, in the area of Kadesh, Moses became angry? Look at Numbers 20 for a moment if you have your Bibles. And it says, the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin, and the people abode in Kadesh. And Miriam died there and was buried there. And there was no water for the congregation. And they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people strove with Moses and spoke, saying, would we had died when our brethren died before Jehovah. Why have you brought the assembly of Jehovah into this wilderness that we should die here, we and our beasts? And wherefore have you made us to come out of Egypt, to bring us into this evil place, a place of no place of seed or of figs or of vines or of pomegranates, neither is there any water to drink? And Jehovah spoke unto Moses, saying, take the rod and assemble the people, and speak unto the rock before their eyes, that it give forth its water. And you shall bring forth to them water out of the rock, so you shall give the congregation and their cattle drink. And Moses took the rod from before Jehovah, as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said unto them, hear now, you rebels, shall we bring forth water out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand and smote the rock with his rod twice, and water came forth abundantly. And the congregation drank, and their cattle. But Jehovah said unto Moses and Aaron, because you believe not in me, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. Therefore Moses died and did not cross into the promised land. Moses served God almost all his life. His deeds before God were numerous and plenteous. But when Moses did not acknowledge God in one thing, he was punished. We cannot possibly acknowledge God in everything the way we're supposed to. Therefore, it's only through the saving grace of Christ that we can possibly avoid the punishment which is due us. Moses was punished for one small infraction. We are guilty of so many more than that. The horrors of Revelation await us unless we come to Christ the way we're admonished to. The people say that Revelation is only one book in the Bible. The warnings in Revelation are repeated over 600 times throughout the Scriptures. It's not that we haven't been told often enough what awaits us.